Hello and welcome. If you hear weird noises in the background, it is because there's a fan, there's a window open. It's July in Canada, which means it's hitting 40 degrees. I don't know what that is Fahrenheit, but it is hot, guys. So my plan for this year is to combine the mid-year freakout tag and the mid-year check-in tag, and then add some of my own questions and stuff, because both of those tags have been for a while and they've kind of done separate things, but things that I both like, and all of those original people have all retired from booktube, which is sad that we lose people every year. However, I would like to talk about some books that I've done. I am cutting this off on June 30th, so even though I have now read 4 or 5 books in July, I will not be including these in the things that I'm talking about. So how many books have I read so far? I read 55 books. I think it's the lowest that I've ever done, but I am really proud of myself. I've had some reading slumps. I've allowed myself to read when I want to read, and sometimes that is, reading 5 books in the first 6 days of July, and sometimes I didn't read any books in the last half of June. So sometimes it just goes around like that, and I'm trying to be more okay with that and being more happy with the fact that I will read as I like. The next question is, what genre have you read the most of? And this is literary fiction, which I know is a very nebulous tie. I also have historical fiction, which is up there as well. I read 30 literary fiction and 20 historical fiction, although many of those books kind of overlap in some way because literary fiction is kind of an overarching thing that includes many different genres. So when it's a fantasy book and also a classic, I also count it in both of those for my own statistics. The next question is, what is your favorite book of the year? And this is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin, and I fell in love with the book. There was a vlog of me reading it for the Women's Prize, and I was just enamored by it. I love the multiple perspectives. It looks at family, and particularly these 3 refugees who were originally a part of a family unit. 4 of their siblings and their parents all died, and they made it to China and then later to the UK, and they were growing up and being raised from 1979 until that, and they're taking on a lot of adult roles, and how these things affect them throughout times. On the story is so good. Throughout these narratives, we also have interspersing narratives of refugee times and now, and we also see the point of this island that was once a place of horrific death and torture that is now a tourist thing. We also see this narrator who is the writer, and she's talking about and having complex thoughts about how do we tell stories. Do we erase all the trauma? Do we add all the trauma? How do we make it? How do we balance both joy and pain in families' histories? And it's really intriguing to have that meta-narrative of how do we construct stories on top of that, and that was part of my favorite thing. I'm really excited for what Pin will do next because I think she will be a favorite author in the future. The next question is best sequels. I have not read that many sequels, but I did read River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty, and I really love this book. This is a collection of short stories that takes place during, before, and after the David Bad trilogy. It looks at a lot of the events after, but it also looks at the different characters that S.A. Chakraborty had written and had expanded or written little parts of their backstory but hadn't finished them. And when she felt that she couldn't write anything else, she expanded them. And I just felt these stories were full alive. And the fact that she originally wrote them not with the intention of publishing just shows how much of an in-depth writer she is. And it was just wonderful to dive back into that world. Number 5 is the most disappointing book of the year, and it has to be Dog in the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie. I despise this book. I don't really want to waste that much time on it. It's just not my type. Some people find it funny, sometimes find it entertaining. It is quirky. I'm very quirky. I didn't like it very much. And yeah, it follows this woman who is just encountering a lot of gross things as, her grandmother may be a murderer, and she goes to Australia and her parents disappeared. She has this weird attraction to this man who, shares a toupee with his brother. It's a very absurd book, and I feel like it could have been more cathartic or something, but at the end it just ends. There's no big conclusion, and I guess sometimes people want super realistic books where there isn't a big moment of things, but we don't even get a resolve to whether her grandmother is a murderer or anything. We don't know. That's just a part that was an element that never got resolved. There's lots of rats and mold and gross things, and I have a very low tolerance for anything that's dirty, so anything that's really hyper focused on dirtiness will always be a turn off for me. So what is the most surprising book that you read this year? And I have Oliver Twist up here. I guess it's here too. I have multiple copies of Oliver Twist. I didn't want to take it out of that stack, but I was really surprised because I'd heard that it is an often unliked book by Charles Dickens, and I had read three of his other books before, and none of them I had super liked, so it was not as surprising to like this one. But I just had a desire to read Charles Dickens after hearing Katie from Books of Things talking about her Mega Dickensathon, and I was just like, yes, I need to do this. And it's one of the shortest ones, so I was like, I'm just gonna read it, and I loved it. I have a whole review kind of going over it, and also looking at the legacy and impact and kind of dealing with the controversial issues around Jewish representation in the book, and like having all of those thoughts. And I just really enjoyed the characters and the stories, and it felt the most alive to me, when also obviously having some major issues with the ways that like dynamics and characters are represented in it. Another huge surprise was The Swimmers by Julie Asuka. I really loved this book, and I'd heard very mid reviews about it, and I like hadn't even decided to pick it up, and then I was like, you know what, the short book, I think I just want to read it on audio. And I liked it so much that I went to the library and picked it up halfway through. I have a whole review of me going through the event of like starting it, going to thrift stores, and then like going to the library and reading it. And then I did a whole review where I kind of argue why I think that it's a really cohesive novel that is really marvelous, and looking at mothers and daughters and the deterioration of dementia. And it also really changes up narrative voices in all these sections to what are just such clever things. Like, I really enjoy her as a writer. And then I also read When the Emperor Was Divine, which is an earlier book by her, and it is not as complex as her debut book, but I think that I really enjoyed the ways in which it also told narrative, so I'm really excited for her as an author. And then I read, right at the beginning of the year, Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. This is a book I probably never thought I was going to read. I picked it up at like a thrift store for like $1 like a long time ago, and I was like, well, I'm not gonna not get this classic book for $1. And the only reason is like I never read books on my shelves, and I was like, you know what, this is a really short audiobook, I should read it. And I was obsessed with it, and like I reread parts of it again in physical, and I just really enjoy the ways that it talks about like health and mental health and family and all of these things. Like, it's a book that I'm already thinking 6 months later that like I want to reread and stuff. And I offered to read to my roommate at the time. I was like, I'm having all the rants, I'm like, it's like only 100 pages, I can read it to you now. She said yes, but then it has never happened. Maybe she's not that into bugs. And then I made my own question, which was there any book that particularly impressed you in the way that it was written, or its style, or anything? I just wanted to leave a question open for like, you to rant about a book that didn't necessarily sit in any of these categories, but like, you were really impressed with. And Advika and the Hollywood Wives is a book that really impressed me. I was super excited when I heard that it was kind of like a Taylor Jenkins Reid book, because we have this young woman who marries this man who is 40 years older than her, and then they're like living their romance, and then a few months into their marriage, his first ex-wife, Evie Lockhart, dies and leaves in her will saying that if Julian's latest child bride divorces her, she would leave her $1 million, which is crazy. And this leads Advika to go down this whole cycle of like wanting to research the ex-wives, because there's 3 of them, and like finding out about them and stuff like that. And it is super interesting. And I was like interested at the beginning, because when you are first introduced to Julian, he doesn't seem that bad. Like, obviously he's 40 years older and there's some things, but in general, like, you really see the ways in which abuse and things like that can really be so simplistic. Like, I feel like there's so many little elements throughout the early parts of their relationship and marriage where, like, if you weren't thinking about the fact that you knew in the blurb that this relationship was probably not very healthy, you'd probably miss. But you like really see the ways in which the relationship is beginning to get toxic. It also really shows the romance of security, which I think is so highlighted. Like, so many people were like, I don't understand, like, this is a really low rated book. I think it has like a 3.3 on Goodreads, and that made me even worried to read it. But like, I think that it just did such a marvelous job. She's 26, she's working as a server, she's never succeeded as a film writer. Like, her sister, who's a twin, who's so close to her, that she's always lived with, that she's always had a relationship, suddenly died in a freak accident. Her parents then moved back to India. She just feels so out of place. The idea of someone like looking and taking an interest in you and like wanting all of the things that you want and giving you security is like something that I think people who maybe are more on a sure footing cannot understand how attractive that could be. And I think that that is something that Julian is shown to do throughout his things. He takes people who are more vulnerable and puts them in a position where it feels like they can't refuse. I think I particularly like the ways in which she developed this relationship and showed it, because he never ever is violent toward her and barely ever raises his voice. There's a few times where he'll like get mad in a second, but not in, the typical way that Hollywood would show abusive relationships. It shows abuse in the way that so many people experience abuse and can easily say to themselves, but is that really abusive? And I think that it also really highlights that all of these women are very different and are very creative and lovely in their own ways, even if it's not in the same way, which I really love. And yeah, I just super recommend this book. It also has great friendships and the dynamics of different friendships in your life. I've ranted about this book so long, but I think that it is a book that should have its own place and shouldn't be overlooked in the ways that it has. So I kind of changed up the next question too, because I combined new fictional crush with new favorite character and changed it to a character you've fallen in love with, because I feel like this can be both platonic and romantic, and mine is just like a nice girl crush on Lorelei Lee. I think that she is wonderful. She's from Gentlemen Prefer Blonde, another book review that I did where I mostly just gush about her. This is a 1925 book about this, you know, wonderful socialite slash actress slash, you know, woman about town who has a shady past. Like, she would fit into Chicago, if you know what I mean. And she is wonderful. And she plays on everyone in such an interesting way. Everyone looks down on her and they don't necessarily know the ways in which she cleverly manipulates them normally for materialism. Like, she is a femme fatale for materialism, and I stand. New favorite author or potential favorite author, and I think Natalie Haynes fits this bill. I read the wonderful Stone Blind, which I was just obsessed with. I think it is definitely one of my favorite books of the year, and I just found that the way that she looks at Medusa's story, the way that she looks at the various characters around, I love Ensemble Cast. It's hilarious. It is so well done. It has a point of view from the Gorgons, like snakes, which is great. It's just wonderful. And then I also read her collection Pandora's Jar, which was looking at fictional women in Greek myths and the ways that they're represented and the ways that we can look at how they've been represented back in the time versus now. Like, she's, you know, a degree in classic literature and stuff, and I really loved seeing the ways in which these have changed and the ways that, you know, they talk about narratives and how women are represented. Question number 10 is a new release that you haven't read yet, and I've not read Stolen Air, which is Holly Black's new book in a sequel to The Folk of the Air, and I'm super excited to read this, and I haven't yet. I also haven't read the last 2 books in the Wayward series by Sheena McGuire. I love the series. I think it's book 8 and 9. So last year I didn't read Where the Drowned Girls Go, which is disgraceful. And then I also have Lost and Found. And these are books that look at portal fantasy and looks at these different characters, both at the school where they're kind of like recovering and trying to readjust slash not adjust, trying to like get back to like Wonderland or Narnia or those kind of worlds. And the other ones is origin stories of their time in those worlds. And I love a good fairy tale. Talking about my love of Natalie Haynes, I'm super excited for Divine Might by her. This is a kind of companion to her story about Pandora's Jar, which was the women in Greek myths. This is goddesses in Greek myths, and I'm just really looking forward to the ways in which we will learn about these characters and stuff like that, because it was such a good book the first time. And then Immortal Longings, which is by Chloe Gahn, my girl, and this is a Shakespeare retelling of Cleopatra and Antony, and I think it's going to be wonderful. She has retold Romeo and Juliet, and it is just really lovely to read. This book is a book that makes you happy, and Mysteries of Thorn Manor just made me so happy. This is a sequel kind of novella in the story of Sorcery of Thorns. It doesn't like continue the plot, but it continues the characters' journeys, and it is a world in which books are alive. Like, may I say any more? Do we need anything more? But they have all of these things, and we have a librarian, and we have a magician, and they have a romance, and it's very lovely, and this is just like a very wonderful like 6 months to a year later with them just continuing on their story of this manor that is having some ivy issues, and books are coming alive, and it's just all very wonderful. And then number 13 is a book that made you cry, and I always laugh because I cry in pretty much every book. Like, there are books that I like literally hate or don't like that I'm just still sobbing with. Like, if a type of fiction does not make me cry, like, we're surprised, okay? Like, books, TV shows, books. I am a big crier in general. When I read my own work, I cry, which I know is probably really pathetic. It does not take me a lot to cry, and I shall overcome the stereotypes that we need to be like strong people who don't cry, and yeah, all of those things. I know that like some people just don't cry in fiction, and that's okay, but I do cry a lot. But a book that particularly made me emotional was When We Were Sisters by Fatima Ashgar. This won the Carol Shields Prize, and I'm so thankful because it was definitely another favorite book of the year. I really enjoyed following these sisters and their stories. They are orphaned when the youngest one is 6, and they grow up pretty much are raised by themselves. You know, there's 3 girls in an apartment where their uncle has just put them in the apartment because he wants the checks about them, but he doesn't want to take care of them, and his white family does not really want to have them in there. They are Indian, and he is Indian as well, but he married a white woman, and there's, you know, we don't want these, you know, not at all white children in our lives. and it just follows them growing up and dealing with all the things about being sisters and being a mother sister. And it has really beautiful writing, which some people hate. I love. I love the less traditional types of narration, which can be hit or miss for other people. A book that you started that you should probably finish by the end of the year, and for me this is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I started it. I got probably like 2 hours in. It did return to the library very shortly, but I can't say that it intrigued me that much. I read Yellowface, which I really loved, and I read Babel, which I really loved. Just the fact that this book, which is her debut, so she's developing and stuff like that, it really didn't hit me in the same way. So I'm hoping that she just got into the school at that point, so I'm hoping that that will like really hit into gear the kind of things and I will be more entranced to read it. But so far, I think I put a hold back on, and hopefully I will want to read the like another 18 hours that I've left. So the second last question is 3 books you hope to read by the end of the year. I have Aurora Lee by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and this is a novel in verse way back in the time, and it is about a woman who is trying to be a novelist in the Victorian era, and you know, that is Elizabeth Browning's life as well. I really enjoyed reading her Portuguese poems last year, which I was surprised about. I didn't expect to love so much, and I heard about this from Katie from Books and Things again, and I just became obsessed with it. It's definitely probably going to be a Victober book, so it probably won't be read till October, but I'm hoping to read it. It is an absolutely remarkable thing. It is here. Imagine this whole stack of books that's hard to pull another book out. It is on the shelf below at the bottom of those ones. But this is by Hank Green. This looks at aliens and internet fame and all these things. I've heard remarkable things about this book, and I've had it on my shelf for a remarkable amount of years. So yeah, it's been on my list to read. And he has cancer right now, so it's definitely a good time to support him and to talk about the things that he loves and stuff. So yeah, I already had it on my list, and this is a good reason to finish it. And then the last book is a book that I don't own, but I've been wanting to read, and it is Stories from the Tenants Downstairs. I really love short stories. I really love like interweaving ones, and this is looking at gentrification and how minorities in the US often get treated, and like the kind of thin gap between, you know, poverty. Like, this is a topic that doesn't get talked about enough, and I'm really excited for short stories, and I love when different things appear in different short stories. It makes me so happy. Then number 16 is Eddie Bookish highlights from the year, and I would say the Women's Prize was a huge thing. I love being able to do things that connect people across the community. I think that it's so fun. Like, I'm in Jane Austen July right now, and I just love that when we're all doing things together, it feels so great. And I also found new people, which I really liked. I found old people that I like, you know, didn't necessarily watch consistently that I've started to, and it's just really lovely to have all of us doing something at the same time and like seeing everyone's predictions and being like, nope, you're really wrong, especially about Demon Copperhead. Like, did not like it, but did I enjoy all of your love and excitement at winning? I guess I did. And I got to be on a live show with Charlie and Gemma and Alice, and that was really lovely. So it was just so great. I'm so excited for Booker to come up, and yeah, I don't know, I feel like even if you think these prizes are, you know, dumb or, you know, not really necessarily the best books, I think that doing something as a community is always worth it, and that makes me so happy. So I'm so excited. And then I also think doing reviews, I've always struggled with them. I think that I overthink doing reviews so much because I think that it has to be my best work ever, and that if I don't do a full analysis or a best analysis, or if I'm not completely nuanced or comprehensive, like I'll somehow be a bad reader or a bad reviewer. And I've done 4 in the last 2 months, which is remarkable. I think that getting over that fear and being more proactive has been super great. So I'm really excited for 2023. Like, I've had a great first half of the year. I can't believe it's already over. I would love to hear some of your highlights, some of your disappointments, some of the things that you'd like to talk about, and I hope to see you in the second half of the year.